Well, thanks for agreeing to talk to us. I put up on the blog post about your disability rights advocate, an activist, and also a researcher and stuff. So probably what we'll do is, in the first part of our conversation, I want to kind of focus on some of the disability work that you do and your research and how that kind of relates to conflict and stuff. And then when we come back for part two, we'll develop that conversation a little bit further about a particular project idea that I've got that I'd like to share with you. Online, on film. So whatever you then say, you have to do. No, I'm only joking. It's an ambush. It's an ambush.
That's what it is.
Yeah, that's cool. So how did you first become interested in the sort of the disability rights advocacy role and activist and then the research? What came first?
I think it partly came about because I got a disability when I was in my 20s. I was diagnosed with MS, and my life changed a lot. And I had some friends at the time when I had to look into claiming benefits and stuff like that, and it was a complete minefield. I didn't know what I was doing. And I had some friends who were involved in the local disability sort of networks and stuff there are in Nottingham. And that's partly how I kind of started to sort of think more kind of that way and everything. And then I actually later on did my master's. And I became the Disabled Students Officer. So that was really great as well, to kind of work with students and try and look at the kind of the education aspects and trying to make education as accessible as possible, such as when there were fire alarms, kind of making sure they had flashing lights for people who are deaf, and also simple things like subtitles, because a lot of the lectures weren't subtitled. So that was also that really kind of piqued my interest. And on my master's dissertation, I did that on PIP and the right to independent living, as my master's was on kind of human rights and that aspect of things. And that's kind of really when I got really sort of more passionate about it, and just sort of looking at the concept of disability in society, and how it's visible and yet invisible to a large extent. And a lot of the social welfare changes that were coming through at the time, the Welfare Reform Act that kind of came in under the coalition government after 2010, and there was actually also a lot of campaigning online to do with that, such as the Spartacus report, when people were trying to stop a lot of the changes from disability living allowance to PIP. And then I suppose to add to that, but alongside of this, I actually am an advisor at Citizens Advice as well. So I think also just seeing that day-to-day impact of what a lot of these changes have made on people with disabilities and long-term health conditions is kind of really what kind of brought it all full circle, if you like. So I suppose the theoretical as well as the practical, seeing it through real people, that's kind of made me passionate in the way I am about it.
Yeah, and also, like you said, because your own personal situation, having to find that information out yourself, it's that willingness to then share it with others and probably explain it in a way that's a little bit easier to understand as well, because I sometimes feel that these things are deliberately done in order to catch people out. I know we've had that conversation many times, haven't we, about like the wording that people use, where someone would see it as a fantastic achievement that they are able to get out the house and walk to get a newspaper. Suddenly the fact that they've gone past a bus means, well, why can't you get on a bus and go to work? It's a really strange situation that we've had over the last 10 years with austerity and this seeming attack on vulnerable people and people with disabilities in particular around, why aren't you contributing? Why can't you work type thing. I mean, you must have seen some quite traumatic cases that come into CAB seeking advice about something that's actually quite logical, but they probably couldn't access that information anywhere else. And sometimes is it just the fact that they get to talk to you?
I think, probably all of that's true, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I do kind of deal a lot with mandatory considerations, which is the first stage of the appeal process with PIP and with the employment support allowance, and also with the paperwork for the appeal stage for personal independence payments and stuff. And you see people from all walks of life. I think one thing with disability, it's a complete leveller. It can happen to anybody, basically. I know there's quite a few disability campaigners and writers who call people without disabilities not yet disabled. It's kind of very much that running alongside. And I think people just, this whole idea of social welfare, people have never had to venture into it, so they just don't know where to start. And yeah, you're right, a lot of the questions, like, because I follow a lot of the cases of like how to interpret, like sort of with tribunals, of how to interpret the criteria to get these sort of benefits. But I'm only able to then use that wording when I help them complete a form, because I know about the cases. If you don't know about them, there's some really great forums that are available online. But also, if you have people who see people who struggle with reading and writing, and you get this kind of massive sort of 50-page booklet, and it is just like, you just don't know where to start a lot of the time. And I think having to focus on the negative aspect of your healthcare conditions is something people find really, really difficult. And the questions are very, very personal as well, and as well as the assessment as well. And I think that's, you have to ask, like at the start of the form, I always sort of say, look, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask some really personal questions. I just have to do it so we can get through the form, kind of thing. Such as like toilet needs, which people kind of really don't want to talk about, like if they're having continence issues. But it is like, one thing very frustrating with social welfare is it's a one-size-fits-all approach, but basically ends up fitting nobody. And a lot of the criteria that have been brought in very much seem to have a kind of a neoliberal, reduce the size of the welfare state. I mean, if you do a direct comparison to the previous benefits that were disability living allowance that it replaced, the changes were first of all announced by the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the budget, saying that they were going to cut 200,000 people. So it wasn't just saying we had to do this because of austerity. It seemed, but to approach it towards people most in need, it very much seemed to be based on money. But also then the things that the two benefits look at have completely changed, such as with mobility, there's now 2 questions, and one of those is only based on walking from A to B. Whilst before it was sort of kind of half the booklet was that. So it is really different, but it is just literally often known using the right words and criteria and that sort of thing, indeed, yeah.
And what we're talking about is people in, quite precarious situations, sometimes quite vulnerable, maybe particularly if it's a disability that, as you said, not yet disabled, that's come on. Then, if you start adding into that sort of, women and girls, or people from different nationalities, different ethnic backgrounds and stuff, suddenly you're even more vulnerable in those groups as well, to the point where you probably don't feel you're able to or cannot access support.
Yeah, I think that is very true, actually. Yeah, and sometimes there can be a language barrier if, say, if you're a woman who has never really kind of done much sort of work outside the home, for example. You've just very much been a carer, taking care of your children and your house and everything, and then suddenly having to come out and say if your marriage breaks down, or if you suddenly just need a lot more assistance because your husband's out with all the affairs. I think that can be very isolating. They just don't know where to turn, and that can be kind of quite difficult. But also we get a lot of mums who come in who are having to kind of complete paperwork for their children, and obviously that's very emotional for them as well, because they're having to again focus on what their children cannot do and everything. But I think on a lot of fields, sort of women and children seem to have like double discrimination, particularly with women, because they're not just sort of discriminated against because they're female, and they have their own kind of sort of aspects that can be like with period poverty, for example. And there's about the period, kind of sanitary products are taxed and everything. There's that kind of level running alongside everything. But then if you add something else on top, or if you're a person of colour, then there's loads of other aspects that can come in, and you get attacked kind of from all angles, really. Yeah.
And then maybe specifically in relation to some of the things we've been talking about with Conflict Reportage, with people that have come here due to, fleeing conflict and stuff like that, there might be a language barrier, there might be an existing disability as well. So suddenly then navigate themselves around, healthcare, accessing funding, accessing the NHS. There's those extra challenges as well, isn't there?
Oh yeah, very much so. And we're kind of always, I think Systems Advice very much tries to empower people. We kind of help to set everything in place and empower them to move forward and everything. But it's sort of knowing the mapped how to move forward, really, and knowing that somebody like ourselves and also other organisations exist, really. to be able to use those tools. And I know that we sort of often get people who are amazed that say that it's free, or just that we're able to help with that. But yeah, we do kind of, I suppose, very much in sort of more crisis or conflict situations. I think a lot of the things that really come through is a lot of the barriers that, so a lot of the support structures that people rely on and put in place, very much often a community network. If those structures are kind of all chopped or dispersed, or if you can't take your equipment with you, if you're having to kind of flee suddenly, which you can also have with domestic violence as well, you have to leave your support structures behind and any form of equipment and everything put into place, then I think it's sort of the vulnerability aspect of that is sort of very much even more so, and because you're vulnerable, you're more likely to be susceptible to other less, how do I put it really, heightened levels of danger. Like you could become kind of a victim of sort of sexual violence, because you kind of don't have any support structures in place, particularly if you have a language barrier, or if you have sensory impairments as well. That's the sort of another level on top of everything else. If you can't kind of explain to people kind of what's happened to you, then that's sort of another kind of really big sort of vulnerability, if you like, on top.
Yeah, I mean, it was fascinating talking to Steve Crump, the founder of Deaf Kids, last night. And I'd never really known why he'd started Deaf Kids. I know that he's deaf himself. So again, there was that he saw the need, I guess, and it was from when he said he was a board member of War Child and realised that deaf children were even more vulnerable than children in that kind of scenario, and there was no one doing anything for those people, and that's where his drive came from, doing that. I mean, if you were to set up an organisation now with a magic wand, and this isn't the ambush that I was talking about because that's in part 2, but if you had a magic wand, what are some of the things? Is it the authentic voices of people with disabilities that are not sort of Paralympians, super crips as you call them, the needy, the worthy, the kind of that kind of stuff? What sort of things would you think, just in a couple of sentences?
As in sort of what to set up, or what I think.
Yeah, what's important is who is it that's being included. I mean, it's not white heterosexual men that have been quite dominant in the disability movement, isn't it?
Yeah, well, exactly. Kind of like originally, kind of how disability was viewed and everything was the medical model, so very much focusing what you can't do, and then the social model, which came in, which is about the disabling aspects of society. That was very much championed by kind of a certain demographic of white men with physical disabilities, and it didn't really take into account all the breadth of disability. I always refer to it as an umbrella term rather than just a one-size-fits-all approach again. And I suppose it is just the authentic voices and them speaking for themselves. I think there's always so many people who can step forward and say, I represent a disabled person, when actually no, not at all. Everybody is completely different, affected in very different ways. And I think having those voices and then using that to support other people, I think is really, really key and really important. And I mean, there are some great online communities and stuff, and one of the sort of phrases that's often used in a lot of disability activism is, alone we whisper, together we shout. And I think that's very much the case, that kind of cumulative effect of the voices together to actually kind of get our point to put across. And obviously the aspect is if those voices are listened to, which again we saw with the welfare reform bill that went through and came, that changed all the benefits. There was actually quite a lot of big campaigns around it, but unfortunately didn't really happen. And also the consultation that took place before that, they consulted with lots of disability charities, but didn't actually listen to it. But actually just thinking of with something that a lot of people with disabilities also kind of really struggle with is you have these really big charities who kind of, again, say they represent people with disabilities, but they're these big corporate organisations as well. And sometimes some of the images they use of disability in order to kind of get funding, the charity model, if you like, coming through, again, focuses on the kind of the worthy individuals who need their support, or the inspirational individuals, look what they can do kind of thing. And that's very, very frustrating. So I think the authentic voice is something that is really important, that kind of needs to come across for people.
Yeah, the focusing of the, or the enabling of the authentic voice. And probably my colleague Rob Watson would say, with the ability to be able to access some training in order them to own and shape their own narrative and tell that story in that way, using things like social media, free platforms. If the mainstream media is hell-bent or appears to be in the situation where they're either supporting the policies that are demonising these people, or come at it from the point of view where they play up to that sort of, entertainment, super crip, Paralympian, that you said, the worthy type thing. Interesting. Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you on the other side about 11:30, if that's okay.
Excellent. I look forward to the curveball then. So
Get ready. Okay. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.